Hi, guys. How are you? It's Christina Pinzone here with Stateside Affairs. Thank you for joining us for our second installment of Live with Stateside Affairs. I want to thank everyone who tuned in for our first show a few weeks back. We had over 10,000 views, so I really appreciate that. As many as you guys know, I'm the owner of a public and government relations company, and we do a lot of political work as well. And I wanted to focus on the vote by mail process. That's what our show today will be about. It would be analyzing the effects of the absentee ballot, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. And so I wanted to introduce two important guests of ours. Let's start off with our first guest, Dr. Campos Medina. She's a nationally recognized political commentator, and she's a proven record of experience in grassroots and union organizing. I've worked on multiple campaigns with her, and so thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here and being part of this important discussion right now. So thank you.
Thank you. In full disclosure, she's my Lupe sister. She's the past media president of Lupe PAC, and so we've known her. I've known Patricia for a very long time, and she is very astute and knows the process really well. So if there's anyone that I would go to for political advice, it would certainly be Patricia.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like we have developed this great network of women in the state through Lupe and through our network with other community organizations to be engaged in this debate about elections, about redistricting, about the right to vote, about women political engagement. And you are at the center of all that work. So I also appreciate the work that you're doing, creating spaces for us to talk about those important issues for women in general and for communities of color to engage in the political process in New Jersey.
Yep. No, thank you. I appreciate it. And so next we have Adil Ahmed, who's an attorney and director of worker and organizing policy at Make the Road Action New Jersey. Adil, thank you for joining us. Can you let us know a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Adil Ahmed. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Christina, for inviting us. You guys have done such great work across the entire state, close allies of Make the Road Action members and Make the Road New Jersey members. And I'm glad to be here to talk about what a bunch of our leaders and members have been doing and what they're planning to do this fall.
Great. Thanks, guys. Thank you for joining us again. I do want to, we are, like I said, a public and government relations company. I've done a lot of work personally, working with Democratic organizations. However, I think it's very important to hear from both sides of the aisle. And so I welcome everybody who has questions to send them over so Patricia and Adil can address them. I also want to ask everyone to send us your questions. Go to our website. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube. And if you want to check out any of our previous videos, you can go to our YouTube page, as I mentioned. But let's get to it. So the vote by mail process has been it's hotly debated issue right now. You hear a lot about it on the national level. Our President Donald Trump is saying that he doesn't want a vote by mail. He doesn't trust the process. Many states have used it here. Say, for example, like in the primary elections in New Jersey, and thousands have been rejected. So, Patricia, from your analysis, what could you make of the primary elections in New Jersey? How did that pan out in your perspective?
Well, we got to start by understanding that the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic forced us to make decisions about how to conduct this election because it was a health and safety crisis. So putting people on voting in person was not a safe thing to do from the stand of our citizens. So therefore, turning into a mail-in ballot process was the right decision to make And now what we have to do is figure out what worked, what didn't work, and how we can improve it. Now, protecting the legitimacy of voting is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's an issue of our democracy. So I come into the process of analyzing voter results and who votes and who doesn't vote and whose ballots were counted or not from an issue of our democracy. Our goal, a democracy doesn't function if people don't turn out to vote. The premise is that we need to make sure that everybody understands what the voting process is and what is the steps that they need to be taken to vote. It doesn't matter to me if those who come out to vote at that point are Republicans or Democrats. We want clarity, and we want a clear process that all county clerks will follow, so that they can count the ballots once they are counted by our folks. So I want to start right there, because I don't want to make this a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is about our democracy to start with. So in that sense, we got to remember that primary elections are for the base of each party. So there is the base, the most activist voters are the ones who vote, who are either registered Democrats or who are registered Republicans, or if you are registered as a third party, but I don't think we have a third party running this time around. But it's the most activist, right? It's not the general public. So while the results that we have right now actually were pretty good, they're comparable to the results of the primary election in 2016. Given the circumstances, Ballot turnout, the return of numbers were only 10% lower than 2016 for the primary, which, given the crisis, I think it's understandable. We only had like a month to prepare for the vote by mail. So the turnout for the primary election were okay. Now, if you break it by race, by economic status, by whether you are an urban voter or a suburban voter, we will see who voted or who didn't, but we yet don't have the ability to do that kind of analysis. But overall, I think about 26% of all registered voters came out to vote, 38% of registered Dems, and about the same time of registered Republicans. So in terms of turnout, it was a decent turnout. In terms of what it means, we can continue with the next question. So I don't want to take all the time.
No, I mean, so I'll reference like recent article from New Jersey Globe that said the turnout for the 2020 New Jersey elections were the highest in state history, which is great, counting more than 1.4 million ballots that were cast. However, a staggering 27,000 of those were rejected. That's a crazy amount. So what are your thoughts, Adele?
There are so many thoughts, especially as Patricia said, that we actually don't have all the information just yet. And I thought maybe what I could do is I can describe a little bit about what Make the Road Action is. I think a lot of people know what Make the Road New Jersey is, but a lot of folks don't know that we have Make the Road Action New Jersey, which is a 501c4 advocacy organization. And our mission, as our members are members of Make the Road Action New Jersey, to build political power for immigrant working class communities to win progressive policies, right, across the state and across the country. We're the sister organization of Make the Road New Jersey, which is a 501c3 immigrant and workers' rights organization. And then I definitely have some thoughts on it, and maybe I'll just sort of go through what we did in 2018 and what we did over the past couple months and what we've learned over the past several months from doing some voter registration as well, and some thoughts on the VBM strategy. In 2018, Make the Road Action knocked on 13,000 doors of voters of color across CD7 and CD11. We made about 30,000 calls in CD3 to help flip seat blue. And we also endorsed Bernie Sanders, and Make the Road Action New Jersey, Nevada, which is our sister organization, was very instrumental in ensuring his victory in the Nevada primary. And I'll definitely post a link for our Make the Road Action New Jersey platform in the chat box as well. And so over the past several months, this year, 2020, we really wanted to make sure that voters of color, new American voters, potentially progressive voters, folks who are registered or who haven't voted in a while, were actually able to get out and knew how to vote. And in New Jersey, only registered Democrats and registered Republicans received VBM ballots automatically. Independent voters did not get vote by mail ballots automatically. And that created a lot of confusion from what we saw. And, we wanted to make sure that we reached more potentially progressive voters and voters of color. So we started a specific campaign. We developed a campaign several months ago where we did a lot of some pretty innovative ways of reaching out to people. We built lists based on identifying questions based on race and ethnicity to identify about 20,000. This is our bucket, 20,000 unaffiliated voters in CD7, CD11, and CD3 who were voters of color and potentially progressive. We then contacted each of them over the phone or through Hustle. Hustle is a peer-to-peer texting platform where our members literally texted every single voter of numbers that we've had in those locations to urge them to register to vote. And then we provided a one-on-one texting assistance to help them actually figure out that process. If we didn't get a ballot, why, how to fill out the ballot. And then we also held online trainings in Spanish to teach people about vote by mail and how to register. Now, what I think is pretty interesting, the county clerks this past election cycle, some of them issued videos explaining what vote by mail is, but none of the videos were in Spanish. They were all pretty, monotone videos in English. And so if we're really thinking about engaging new American voters, immigrant working class communities, we have to make sure that we're really educating people in a thorough way and making sure that they actually know how to fill out the ballot. Now, we're really concerned. So after all of that work, we were pretty concerned that the participation of communities of color is really low. We really believe that we have to invest in doing get out the vote in communities of color. And we're going to continue to innovate around peer-to-peer texting, targeted ads. I should have added that. We did a couple targeted ads in those districts throughout the primaries with some videos to, sort of educate people on how to vote. And we got some interesting data from that. And our two main takeaways from all of this work over this, over the July and frankly the May elections were there was a lack of confidence from voters in knowing whether or not their vote was counted. Folks just had no idea. I filled it out, did it for the first time. No one ever knew if their vote was counted. And the second takeaway was, where do you go to vote? I think the statistics show from a letter that the League of Women Voters put out and the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice put out not too long ago, show that communities of color feel far more comfortable voting in person.
Yes.
The media and the press around all of this kept talking about this election as an all vote by mail election. So the fact that everyone was saying this is all vote by mail, folks had no idea where to show up on election day. And then they had no idea what drop boxes were. And so, our recommendations, and maybe we can get into that a little bit, but now to finally answer your question, Tina, why were some of the ballots rejected? Colleen O'Day did a great study in May to showcase some of the top reasons about why ballots were rejected. And they were rejected because the signature on the ballot didn't match the one on file. The ballot arrived too late, or the required certificate wasn't enclosed. So those three parts, the signature on the ballot arriving late, or the required certificate not being enclosed is why a lot of ballots were thrown out. Now, that was the study from the May primary, not the July primary. The July primary is also pretty concerning if you look at
exactly.
I'm assuming for the same reason why ballots were.
And that's what I mean. Like, we don't really know. We don't have real information at this point because I think that we're just finally certifying the counts this week in many of our counties. But I agree with Adil. I think the most concerning part is the lack of knowledge that the average voter has about how to go about vote by mail. Vote by mail favors a more educated, more social mobile voting group that understands all the steps. So the education part of training people to understand the ballot, how to fill it out, where to put it in, I think that was missed, but we need to figure out how to do that better for the general election. We also need to do a better job of amplifying the work that make the road action was doing, because they were doing it with very few resources in very targeted areas. But they were not all over our heavy voting populations like Jersey City, like Newark, like Patterson, which are voters of color were really not understanding the process. Nobody was telling them there was an election, and they really don't have the information to go to vote. So that's the piece that we have to get better. And with the whole Trump attacks on questioning the validity of the process, I always, if something is confusing, I always sort of test it with my parents. They are immigrants. They became citizens about 15 years ago. They vote. They love going to the polls and voting, getting in the booth and signing their name. And they didn't know what to do with the ballot, so we had to sit there and had to explain to my father, you sign here, you put the envelope here. And I was just thinking, who is doing that for the great number of working class voters in our cities? Because nobody that type of education wasn't happening. So that's something that we as a society, as New Jersey, as advocates, at Lupe, we care about Latino families, Latina women voting. So we sort of have to figure out, how do we engage in the process of educating voters about the process of vote by mail? The process can be legitimate, but if a lot of people are not participating, it legitimizes the process.
Mm-hmm. So that's a huge undertaking for grassroots organizations to ensure that everyone, especially the minority vote, is counted. What can the state and federal government do?
Well, it shouldn't be, I'm going to step in right there, because it shouldn't be just the responsibility of grassroots organizations. We do it because we're fighting for life and death issues for minority communities. But it also should be a concern for both political parties, because the bottom line is that perhaps in the primary, they only need their base. But in the general, we need to move the middle of the electorate, which is unaffiliated, to come out and vote. So it shouldn't be just us as advocates fighting for more education on how to vote, but it should be something that both political parties invest in doing, and rather than just get on the rant with President Trump about legitimacy of it. So I just want to say that, because I think that we don't have the resources to educate the entire population in New Jersey. We need both political parties to get on the bandwagon.
So what should they do?
And I'll just add, maybe, since I think you're right, Patricia, it shouldn't be just a burden we put on grassroots organizations. And Christina, your question was about what could the federal government do? Well, the United States Postal Service is constantly under attack. And, there's a concern about votes even getting to the location on time, and them being sent in late and them not being counted. One of the solutions here is expanding Dropbox locations.
Yes.
Now, and one of the provisions this past election cycle was that the Dropbox, the policy that the Secretary of State put out, was that the Dropbox had to be put in a centralized location that was monitored by a camera 24/7 hours a day, right, to ensure that it was protected and secure. And what ended up happening was that Dropbox locations were all basically around libraries, great, and police stations. And then the question becomes do people feel comfortable driving up to the police station and putting their ballot in the box?
Yeah.
And so, we do need funding for that, to expand Dropbox locations, security. What if all of the locations were around churches or around offices of grassroots organizations, nonprofits that had close connections to the community, and they were secured on a public street there, and there was funding to secure that? That would be awesome. But right now, we have a government that's constantly defunding the Postal Service. So there isn't any security that our votes are going to be counted there. And then we also don't have a totally full-on program for Dropbox locations.
Yeah. I would like to say that, the campaign, we need the Postal Service because people trust the Postal Service. So we need to figure out how to protect that we have that service that has always been there since the founding of this country. But I believe that what Donald Trump and President Trump is doing is actually put doubt on communities of color about the voting process, so that perhaps they don't trust it and they don't show up to the poll, or they wait until election day to go out and vote, and create this panic about voting in person. So that's why, to me, we sort of have to be very proactive in educating voters about what is the process that we are going to engage in right away. So I would urge Governor Murphy to make a decision right away about whether the election is going to be a mix, a hybrid version, or is it going to be just by mail? Or because that will give us more time to actually educate the public about how to go about voting elections. We need to know, because the clerks need to know what to do, but also we need to know what's their best approach to educate people so that they don't feel disfranchised, because they're fearful. Remember, communities of color, African Americans, and immigrants, they feel more comfortable going to the ballot to box. We have to start there. But they also, they are not regular voters. They do not get contacted or reminded that there is an election. So we need to also engage in the process of reminding people that there is an election and how they're going to vote. Because people vote when they get asked to vote. And usually we are the only ones who ask our communities of color to vote. And so the Trump playbook is to get communities of color not to know what to do on election day, so that his followers, who are more perhaps astute in voting by mail, do it and not ours.
Yeah,
and I'll just add there. Oh, sorry. Just want to add one detail to what Cynthia was already saying. Adding on is, there was a study in the research done that about 40 to 50% of voters had no idea the election was in July.
Yeah,
that's
true. Yes,
and so there you go. It's all about education and doing it early.
Yes.
So that goes to my point. So a lot of voters, as a result of the May and July elections, were left confused and discouraged. And as you mentioned, Adil, their votes were rejected, and in some cases, they weren't even notified.
Yeah.
So how is that? I mean, obviously, like, there's going to be a surge of people that are probably going to have to apply, or they're not going to even have an option and have to vote by mail. And so then it comes, like, I think the question is, how do the state and federal government also deal with that surge? What do you guys anticipate with that? And if you can also kind of walk us through, like, the vote by mail process for people that are used to voting in person, that really don't fully understand what it is or how it is to vote by mail.
Totally. Yeah. I think that all makes sense. I think what we learned, over the past several months here is that education is, really, really important. And, part of the litigation with the Secretary of State, which is why some of these protocols were put in place into July, was something called cure letters. The first part of the question was about people not knowing if their ballot was counted and what they could do about it, right? And so the three reasons why people's votes probably weren't counted, we don't really know the entire reason, although some counties have disproportionately higher numbers of ballots that were rejected, were signatures not being able to be verified, ballots arriving too late. We talked about that a little bit, and the required certificate when you fill out the ballot not being enclosed. And so I'll talk a little bit about cure letters. Someone asked here about if they'll know whether or not their vote was counted. One of the solutions is a cure letter. So if a ballot comes in early, someone votes by mail and the county gets it, they're supposed to send out a letter back to that person saying, your ballot was not counted. This is why. You have an opportunity to cure it, to fix whatever error they found. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that those cure letters are sent out after the election. They're sent out like the day of the election or the day after the election. So if you get a letter in the mail a week later, people are still counting ballots as BLC. We didn't get results for weeks. They're not going to respond to that, and their vote won't get counted. I think one thing that's really important is that people look out for a cure letter in the mail. All the counties were supposed to provide it in July. I don't know if they all actually sent them, but I know several counties did send cure letters. Another recommendation is that the government expands the online voter registration system online so that people can just check online to know whether or not their ballot was counted. That's a recommendation. That's something that the Secretary of State, that the governor next week can put forth in his recommendations, and something that I think we would all urge them to do to ensure that people know if the ballot was counted, especially if they submitted early, and then they can call, their local clerks, their county clerk's office to ensure to figure out what else they can do next. Another thing is, if it is unfair that ballots are rejected because of simple kind of verification issues. As a young person, you can. Thankfully, I can use my hands, but like 40, 50 years from now, I might have arthritis and I might not be able to sign my signature the same way, the same flashy way that I sign it now, and that's not, my ballot might get rejected. I don't know how many seniors' ballots were rejected because their signature didn't match whatever was on file for when they first registered to vote. That's the change, or there has to be a faster mechanism for people to cure that problem and how votes are counted. And hopefully it will change. And so I think that's one thing people can do is that cure letter is something they can look out for. The government could expand the online voter registration system to make sure that people can check if their ballots are counted. And as we all know, lots of parties and county parties, committee parties in each town are, during elections are checking the election rolls every day to see which ballots came in and which ones didn't, and they send out their committee members to go get the rest of the votes. But that's really not information and work that everyday people are doing to make sure that their votes are counted.
Is this a recommendation that your organization has already made to Governor Murphy and the Secretary of State, or are these serious conversations that you've already heard that are taking place within state government?
Yeah, so that specific recommendation, that is a recommendation that actually was put out by the League of Women Voters and the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, which we support. But that was a letter that is a public letter that was sent to the governor's office, that was sent to the Secretary of State Way's office to give them some recommendations on how to improve elections, and that is something that we support.
Yeah. And I think that, given that you are a communications PR firm, I think what we really need to see is a lot more education of voters, all voters, not just Republicans or Democrats, but all voters about the process, and in a cultural, competent way. A lot of clerk offices do have those videos, but they're not clear, or they do not address. They're not culturally competent. And one thing that we need to remember is that the highest increase of voters in New Jersey in the last 10 years has been around new immigrants from all parts of the country, Latinos and Asians. And in the Asian umbrella, there's a lot of different languages and a lot of different cultures that we need to figure out how to engage and communicate with them. So cultural competency in education, working with partners like Make the Road Action, with Lupe, or other groups that are working with these communities is important. We work a lot in coalition with League of Women Voters and with Institute for Social Justice, because they've sort of been tracking these issues for a long time. And we sort of work in conjunction with them in the advocacy side, but we also sort of have to step back and say, what do our communities need for them to understand the election process? And what do we have to demand for our institutions and our political bodies to give us the tools and the resources to be able to engage more new voters in the process?
Well, I mean, I just think it makes logical sense and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but the Latino vote is the largest minority or voting bloc in this presidential election. So it would make sense to invest money to educate those voters so they can go and vote. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And the Asian vote has grown tremendously in
a lot of folks don't know this, but the South Asian community has the second fastest rising population of undocumented community members in the state of New Jersey. And it's definitely an untapped resource for people who are, struggling, fighting to become citizens and wanting to be able to vote. And there is that pipeline of folks who are, hopefully will or trying to get their citizenship and will register. And that is a whole base of voters out there.
Yeah.
So hopefully, as a result from this conversation, we can offline and see how we can work together to get these two groups to get out and to vote. Patricia, you had sent me some resources prior to this conversation, and I'm just going to ask Laura if she could remove that lower banner, please. Yeah, to kind of talk about the security features of mail-in ballots, if you kind of want to walk us through that.
I think that another of our allies in this work is Action Together New Jersey, and they have done a good job in educating their members and the public about how safe it is to vote. So if you go to their website or you go to their social media, you will find a lot of resources on vote by mail and how easy it is to do it and how secure it is. So this graphic that we see in front of us right now sort of shows the different security features. Like it has a barcode and voter ID. It has a certificate that you have to sign in different places, and then if you have any help getting the ballot filled, that person, in addition to helping you fill it out and taking it to the post office or to the clerk's office, they also have to sign the ballot for you. So that explains it a little bit where the different spaces where people have to sign it, and then you drop it off at the post office or at a ballot drop box, which Adil talked about earlier. So so there's information about how to get it done, right? And it's very safe. It's a barcode. They can track the ballots. And that's why I agree with Adil that if we wanted to make it easier to track whether it was county, you just basically have to track the barcode of the ballot. That requires very little investment on technology. It's just we need the will to get it done. So, Action Together New Jersey is a very good place to find information about this, as well as the League of Women Voters, and make the road action.
Yeah, shout out to Stacey Goldstein Abenstein. She's the Essex County Chair for Action Together New Jersey. Just want to give her a quick shout out.
It's part of the network.
Yeah, there you go. Great. That's great. So, there's also there was another analysis that more than half of young people lack resources to vote by mail. So mobilizing young voters is also a concern. And so there's still, but there's still 77% of voters under the age of 35, according to Next Gen American survey, that said that they're more motivated to vote in this election prior to any other election. So how can we engage, not only teach them, but engage them? I personally, from the campaigns that we use text messaging, marketing, we use those target ads that you talked about. But now with the pandemic and some students going back to school, others aren't, how do we, stay connected with them? How do we get them to vote?
Should I start? I think maybe one way is ensuring that this pandemic, I think, has taken a huge economic toll on so much of the state. Right, New Jersey has the second largest unemployment rate in the country, and I think a good number of those workers are low-income workers, and then also young people who had to go from college and go back home, or young workers who are renting and have left their places and moved back home too. I've heard this story over and over again. And I think one key way of ensuring that they can vote and get out to vote is that they update their address, make sure that they're voting in the right place, making sure that they're getting their ballot, because their vote by mail ballot is going to go to another place if they move back home or they're registered somewhere else. updating your voter registration, making sure that people are targeting demographics that they believe were recently displaced, and making sure that they have, that their voter registration is totally on file and up to date. Another key way is just, creating attractive videos and literature to try to, and talking about the issues, frankly, at Make the Road Action, we have a bunch of issues that we organize around immigrant rights, workers' rights, closing the income inequality gap, and pushing policies and, pushing folks running for office who have real, bold solutions to address those issues. And there's no doubt that young people want big, bold solutions, and that's what we are. We're going to find those people and we're going to get them out.
Yes, I totally agree. I think that there's creative ways based on technology to get to young people, but also those things are things that help. But I think that the known approach is always work with the people that young people get that information from, the people they trust, the organizations that they trust. Because remember, young people traditionally, because of not understanding the system or perhaps not believing in the system, political system, they haven't voted as often as older voters. So they often get ignored because they're not the number one or two voters in every election. So they don't get even reminded but what voting, that an election is happening. So they get the news about that an election from the organizations they belong to. Like Rock the Vote has a big campaign, like the people that they relate to. So we need to partner up with those organizations. I mean, there's a huge movement with, I think they call it the Sunrise Movement. Those are young people who care about climate change. They're doing amazing stuff to try to get young people engaged. We also have seen a rising activism from young people around the Black Lives Matter movement, who are like directly talking to young voters. And most of those voters are going to be first-time voters. So perhaps the traditional party structures of the Democrats and the Republicans will not even touch them. But we who are advocates, we need to figure out how to get them involved in the process so that they can start voting. I mean, one of the, there was a great momentum with the Bernie campaign to get young voters to vote. So I will see a lot of the energy of the Bernie campaign, which is now fully behind Biden, to re-energize the grassroots that Bernie had in terms of young people supporting him. So I hope that we can garner some of that energy from his support, his base, to educate younger voters to vote, because the traditional mechanisms of the parties will not touch them because they're not regular voters for most part. And we need to turn young people into regular voters so that they can change the debate and the tone of our debate in this country towards issues that matter to them. Climate change, issues of student debt, issues of justice around Black Lives Matter. I think there is an opportunity to work with that voting bloc that we haven't even tapped yet.
Cool. I was actually going to ask you that very same question. Are there any, what else is at stake for the November elections? And who, at least in New Jersey, since we are a New Jersey-based company, what candidates will be on the ballot, just to remind folks? Adele,
you want to start, Adele?
After you.
Well, I mean, we have a presidential election. Donald Trump is at the top of the ballot, and he will drive his base to the ballot, the base that doesn't believe on communities of color having political power. He will drive the white nationalist vote to the polls. That's who he's counting on to come out in this election. So we who want to defend the Constitution and want equality and justice and want people of color to vote have to remember, everybody, that if we don't come out and vote, Donald Trump's agenda anti-immigrant, white nationalist and racist agenda will continue to drive, and it's driving our families apart. People, workers of color, communities of color are suffering worse. Not that I wasn't suffering before Donald Trump, but now the economic inequality, the level of impact of COVID-19, of people not having access to healthcare or getting sick, that is real. Our families and deportation that are waiting for a change in our immigration policy. Puerto Rico, how Puerto Rico is going to recover after a series of natural disasters when the federal government doesn't want to address their economic situation. All those discussions are on the table, right? So to me, Donald Trump must be is at the top of our concerns, and communities of color have to make sure that we get him out of the White House. But in New Jersey, we also have we have Senator Booker running for re-election, who has been a very proactive voice in the Senate, trying to raise these issues of all these issues that we have facing. So we need him to go back and be strong in defending the role of the Senate in controlling the abuse of power of Donald Trump. We also have congressional races up and down the state, beginning with Amy Kennedy on CD2, who actually is going to challenge Jeff Van Drew, who has been one of the champions for Donald Trump in New Jersey. He was originally a Democrat and now it's not. So we have that race. And we have Maggie Sherrill, who's running for re-election, and she has been amazing in fighting for New Jersey. So we need her re-elected. And the whole delegation. This point is about how do we take back the Senate so that we can actually get some things done, and how do we keep the House, which is critical in order to pass legislation after we get rid of Trump, or to stop Trump after if anything were to happen where he doesn't want to leave the White House.
And I'll just add, this is the first presidential election when the Republican Party wasn't under a consent decree to not intimidate and scare voters, and specifically voters of color from minority communities. When Governor Kane ran for governor in the early 1980s, the Republican National Committee had people dressed up as soldiers and as police officers standing outside of polling locations, scaring people from voting. And it was a terrible intimidation tactic. And they were under a consent decree for about 30 some years. This is the first presidential election cycle. And so because of that governor's election in New Jersey, where the Republican National Committee supported Governor Keen when he was running for governor, that consent decree was on the Republican Party for so long. Now that consent decree expired. And they don't actually have to follow that consent decree anymore, where they basically declared that they cannot intimidate voters, deploy resources such as fake cops hanging outside of ballot locations with ballot security task force logos on their shirts or whatever they did at the time. But that was kind of the slogan that they had. So I'm very concerned about voter protection this fall, and which is all the more reason why vote by mail is so important. Specifically for our communities, making sure they know how to vote, making sure that our votes are counted when they actually get in there, to do everything we can possible to prevent Donald Trump from deploying all these last-minute tactics to scare people from voting and from preventing, our community's votes from being counted. Which is why vote by mail is so important. We have to expand vote by mail and make it as good as we can, but we also have to make sure that in-person voting is possible, that those locations are expanded in a safe and secure way that's healthy and that doesn't, expose anyone. But we also have to make sure that those polling locations, aren't locations where folks can intimidate voters from showing up, because we know that communities of color, particularly low-income communities of color, prefer voting in person than voting by ballot. Our work is changing that and getting people more accustomed to voting by mail, but we're not going to change that in 4 to 5 months. So we have to do everything we can now.
Yeah. So I think what I'd like to see is some of these conversations happen in other languages. I personally, the reason why we decided to put together this type of forum is, for it to be educational, because I know that there is a lot of confusion out there. People I think even the president himself is confused between a vote by mail, absentee ballots. It's all the same thing. And so I kind of wanted to walk people through the process and let them know like what their options are. And I mean, this isn't an easy situation for anyone. I mean, for the grassroots organizations that are on the ground trying to reach the voters, for state and federal government, I mean, they have their hands full also with this pandemic, this reopening of schools. So, and to your point, Adele and Patricia, it's about how do we improve the process? How do we talk about it in a way that's not one-sided, Democratic or Republican? I mean, these are some of these things are honestly like simple solutions. They're logical. And I understand that funding may be part of the problem, but these are probably like really honest conversations that we should have had years ago. And we're having them now, and we're having them, and I believe that the governor, I believe I read somewhere that he committed to making a statement sometime at the end of August or mid-August on what the elections will look like in November.
I always have said that that we do a lot of things online and electronically, from paying our mortgage to like doing transactions from bank to bank, that are secure and safe. And I think that there's a technology out there to register, to create a system which we can register online. I mean, we need to sort of have those conversations. A lot of more of our people, because of the pandemic, are much more comfortable with technology before, because even our working class members, most people do have a cell phone, and they're very comfortable now communicating, transferring cash through apps, or having meetings on Zoom. So it's like the level of comfort has improved. So I think we need to sort of begin the conversation about how do we bring some of this latest technology into registering voters, into tracking the ballots when they come in, even if we're not ready to go into all electronic voting yet. But how do we create a system that tracks and give us results right away, so that like people like us who focus on the trends, who voted, who's not voting, what are the results, so we can get data immediately, so that we can track it and fix the problem. And I think that's what we don't have right now. Like, we had an election almost a month ago. We still don't have the final numbers of who voted. And that's problematic in terms of fixing whatever problems happen. So I think that conversation needs to begin. And I hope that Governor Murphy is willing to engage with the advocates on that discussion.
So. I'm sure he will. Any other parting words? You guys are good. I do want to share some resources here, including the organizations that you're a part of, or in case anyone wants additional information on how to vote, where to vote, what the general election may look like. LupePAC.org. You'll have Rock the Vote. You also have the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, and of course, you have Make the Road Action, which Adele is a part of. And for anyone who wants additional information about stateside affairs, and we're open always to inviting guests again from both aisles, Democratic, Republican, and it doesn't always have to be a political issue. We're open to bringing and talking about new topics. Just visit us on any one of our platforms, and you have our email address and phone number there. Our website is statesideaffairs.com.
And I just want to say to all of those who are listening, especially our friends in government or in politics, that the work that Stateside Affairs does to communicate with communities of color in an ethnic approach and a culturally appropriate approach is refreshing, and I encourage them all to reach out to you if they need any ideas on how to talk to the different populations that are in their towns, because that's important. It's value. I have a friend of mine who always says brown consultants matter. So being in the appropriate people to help you think through how to communicate your message and your information is very important because we understand our communities, and we can help you communicate better with that. So,
Yeah, no, I
speech for you.
I appreciate the plug. No, we've been doing it. I personally have been doing it probably for like the past 15 years already, and we have a tremendous team. So shout out to Laura, Lisa,
Yes.
and Chris also, who
And all of you are young. Well, you do have young millennials trying to engage the new generation. Generation is it N or C? I don't know anymore.
they're X.
Yeah. I am a Generation X, and you are. But now you have the millennials
Oh,
and
Gen Zers. They're Gen Zers. I'm a millennial.
Yes.
They're Gen Zers.
So.
Yeah. See, we're not as hip as cool as they are, but I like to think that I am.
Well,
So
I have learned a lot from you. So thank you for creating this forum.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for spending the time with us today. Hope to talk to you soon.
Yes.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.